Greetings to all of you, my dear students. Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to discuss something about introduction to CNS. It's a very, very tough topic. So please pay attention to this. I'm going to cover this topic under the following subheadings. That is neurochemical transmission after the introduction, and then regulation of neurotransmitter release and channels of neurotransmitter receptors, synaptic transmission, central neurotransmitters like biogenic amines, amino acids, and peptides, and miscellaneous neurotransmitters like endocannabinoids, nitric oxide, and purines. Anatomically speaking, the nervous system in higher animals can be divided into two types, that is central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, which is again a combination of somatic and autonomic nervous system. So the central nervous system is concerned with regulation of specialized functions like circulation, digestion, and respiration. This you all of you know because you must have studied in physiology. And it is also responsible for the psychic processes such as feeling, attitude, thoughts, and memory. So the ability to think logically, to learn from past experiences, and to communicate appropriately are the unique qualities of man and can be attributed to the development of the highly specialized CNS. So this is the point which segregates the human beings from animals. Then coming to the neurochemical transmission proper, basic process of synaptic transmission in CNS is essentially the same as that operating in the periphery. So you must have studied in the autonomic nervous system, uh, the basic process of synaptic transmission. The same kind of system exists here also, but there are some differences that we'll discuss in detail in this session. Because communication within the nervous system is almost exclusively through chemical messengers, neurosecretion is a fundamental property of all neurons. This is also we are going to discuss about. So what is this neurotransmission? Four processes may occur in relation to nerve transmission within the CNS. They are, one is neurotransmission, neuromodulation, mediation, and then mediation to neurotrophic factors. Analogously, such chemical secretions are termed as neurotransmitters, neuromodulators, neuromediators, and neurotrophic factors, respectively. So these are the processes and these are the chemical secretions that are involved. So neurotransmission is the process by which impulse is propagated across the synapse between two neurons by release of chemical substance. So chemical substance is released at the level of the synapse that is existing between two neurons. So the impulse is propagated from one neuron to other neuron. It is because there is a release of chemical substance. It is otherwise known as neurochemical or neurohumoral transmission. And these neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic cleft and either they stimulate or inhibit the postsynaptic neuron. And in CNS, neurotransmission is exclusively by the release of chemicals which are released at the nerve terminal or synapse, otherwise known as neurosecretion. And the response mediated is very rapid. Neurotransmitter is a chemical substance released on nerve stimulation at one nerve terminal or the synaptic cleft and helps in impulse propagation from one nerve to the other neuron. So what are the various criteria that fit into a particular chemical substance to be called as a neurotransmitter? Let us see. The transmitter must be synthesized in the presynaptic nerve terminal. So this is like two neurons. So this is presynaptic nerve terminal. So it has to be synthesized here and stored in the synaptic vesicles there in the presynaptic nerve terminal and released from the presynaptic terminal on presynaptic nerve stimulation and should be rapidly inactivated after its action is over. So action should not be for a long time. So soon after the neurotransmitter produces its own actions, the action has to be terminated. Then number two, there should be presence of synthesizing and degrading enzymes in the neurons and the presence of neurotransmitter receptor in the target cells. So metabolizing, synthesizing enzymes as well as the metabolizing enzymes should be present. And then on the target cells, neurotransmitter receptor has to be present through which this neurotransmitter has to act. Then number three, on exogenous application, neurotransmitter should produce the same effect as does its endogenous release. Number four, no receptor antagonist should be able to block the action of neurotransmitter. Then coming to the neuromodulators, neuromodulators are released by neurons and also by astrocytes and act either to slow or enhance the pre or postsynaptic responses. This is like modulation. If there is too much excess of response, so it will be diminished. Modulators, neuromodulators will diminish the response. If it is less of a response, the modulators can increase the response. So these neuromodulators arise from neurons as well as from the non-neuronal cells as well. And it is a substance that is derived from non-synaptic site but influences the excitability of neurons and may regulate release of neurotransmitter. They are neither stored nor released like neurotransmitters. Just now we have discussed this. The criteria of a neurotransmitter means it has to be stored in the vesicles. But this neuromodulator, it is not going to get stored. It is immediately released. But it will increase or decrease their efficacy. That is the efficacy of neurotransmitters without participating directly as neurotransmitter. So this will either enhance or decrease the efficacy of the neurotransmitter. They act with a longer latency of action, producing long duration of action. Example, adenosine, prostaglandins, nitric oxide, purines, peptides, etc. So what is neuromodulation? It is a less clearly defined process and is thought to occur at pre and postsynaptic levels to regulate the release of neurotransmitters, modulate the postsynaptic excitability, or induce long-term changes by affecting gene transcription. So this is the process, that is the chemical, that is the only difference. And this process is mainly useful to induce long-term changes by affecting gene transcription, that is for like synaptic potentiation. Neuromodulation relates to synaptic plasticity, which means long-term changes in synaptic transmission, connectivity, and efficacy following pathological damage, as in case of epilepsy or drug dependence, or even following physiological alterations in neuronal activity. For example, in case of learning and memory, that particular excitability of the postsynaptic neurons have to be present for a little bit more amount of time, then only the process of learning and memory happens. So in such situation, neuromodulators are very, very useful. It also involves short-term events like neuronal gene transcription and even alteration in synaptic activity of one transmitter by another. Then neuromediators, the substances that help in elicitation of postsynaptic response subsequent to release of neurotransmitter. So these mediators, they will get released and they help the postsynaptic response of a particular neurotransmitter. They just help. So they are nothing but second messengers, which we have discussed in our receptors class, like cyclic AMP, cyclic GMP, RP3, and calcium. The neurotrophic factors. Trophic means feeding. So these are the substances, or otherwise referred to as neuropeptides, produced by neurons, astrocytes, microglia, and peripheral inflammatory or immune cells within the CNS. So what is the main role of these neurotrophic factors? They help in repair of damaged cells or neurons. So the drugs that can cause formation or secretion of these peptides may be helpful in repair of nervous tissue. So that is in pathological conditions, these neurotrophic factors are very, very helpful. These act over a longer time scale than neuromodulators to regulate the growth and morphology of neurons because of the repair functioning system. So, but some of them may also affect the functions of the immune system as well. They also control long-term changes in brain, that is synaptic plasticity, remodeling, and phenotype characteristics, which we have discussed just now, mainly by affecting gene transcription by acting through tyrosine kinase linked receptors. So examples of these neurotrophic factors are cytokines, chemokines, growth factors like NOT growth factor, insulin-like growth factors, transforming growth factor, alpha and beta, and platelet-derived growth factor. So till now we have 7 categories of neurotrophic factors, that is like nerve growth factors, brain-derived neurotrophic factors, neurotropins, neuropoietic factors, growth factor peptides, insulin-like growth factors, fibroblastic growth factor, axon guidance molecule, that etc. etc. Neurohormones, what are they? The substances that are released on nerve stimulation directly into the blood circulation and then act on distant target organs are called neurohormones. So there is like they are released at one site and then they directly get released into the blood circulation or nerve stimulation, but the action is produced at a distant site, that is the target organs. Example is hypothalamic hormones that are released into hypothalamo-pituitary portal circulation, like oxytocin, vasopressin, etc. This you might have studied in your physiology already. Then what is co-transmission? Sometimes in many brain and spinal cord neurons, more than one transmitter is present, particularly if it is peptide as neurotransmitter. So more than one transmitter getting released at a time. So in such a situation, the two transmitter either act jointly together as friends on postsynaptic membrane or affect the release of transmitter from presynaptic terminal. So one transmitter, both are getting released. So one transmitter may control the release of the other transmitter, or they both together act on the postsynaptic membrane. So because both of them are getting released at one time, so no single agonist or antagonist can be discovered. Example is co-storage and co-release of noradrenaline and ATP. Then regulation of neurotransmitter release. Presynaptic receptors are important for the regulation of release of neurotransmitters. On nerve stimulation, there is release of neurotransmitters by influx of calcium, and release neurotransmitter apart from acting on postsynaptic receptors also stimulates presynaptic receptors, which are important to feedback regulation, that is either increase or decrease depending upon the neurotransmitter and the amount of neurotransmitter released. They are also called autoreceptors. So what happens? At the nerve terminal, neurotransmitter is going to get released. And it is going to act on the receptors that are present on the post-synaptic nerve. It is going to act on the postsynaptic receptors. And this release of the neurotransmitter is mainly because of the calcium influx and then depolarization and everything happens. So instead of acting on postsynaptic receptors, sometimes they go back and act on the presynaptic receptors, which may modulate the release of the neurotransmitter, depending on the increase or decrease in levels of the neurotransmitter and even the type of the neurotransmitter that is present also. So because it is like a feedback regulation, they are also otherwise known as autoreceptors. Please don't get confused. This presynaptic autoregulation will come back and forth throughout your systemic pharmacology. Presynaptic receptors may be of several types, either GPCR or inotropic receptors, and activation of both types regulate neurotransmitter release in different situations. So whenever there is activation of GPCR, it leads to reduction in the neurotransmitter release, thereby closing the negative feedback loop. Whereas inotropic receptor stimulation results into increased concentration of neurotransmitter through calcium cascade. Then regulation of neurotransmitter release. This here, the presynaptic terminals may also have receptors responding to neurotransmitters released from other neurons. So activation of these receptors, which are otherwise known as heteroreceptors, can also influence the neurotransmitter release. So presynaptic receptors are there, presynaptic terminals are there. So these presynaptic receptors, they respond to neurotransmitters released from other neuronal membranes, other neurons. So they are referred to as heteroreceptors, which can again like act as like a modulators or feedback regulation, whatever you call. So autoreceptors means same neuron, heteroreceptors means some other neuron. Presynaptic receptors are thus important from the neurophysiological point of view and as potential targets for therapeutic agents. Then coming to ion channels and neurotransmitter receptors. Neurotransmitters exert their effects on neurons by binding to two distinct classes of receptors. Number one is ligand-gated channels or inotropic receptors, and number two is metabotropic receptors. First, we'll look into inotropic receptors. So here what happens, these receptors consist of multiple subunits. You all know. So we have discussed all these things in receptor topic. So I'll be going a little bit fast. So binding of the neurotransmitter ligand directly opens the channel, which is an integral part of the receptor complex. So ligand binding to the receptor, so channel opening, and then action potential is generated and impulse is transmitted. These channels are insensitive, are only weakly sensitive to membrane potential. So this is not like voltage gated channels. Activation of these channels typically results in a brief, that is few milliseconds to tens of milliseconds. So we have discussed this point also already. Opening of the channel. Ligand-gated channels are responsible for fast synaptic transmission because they are taking very short gap of time, typical of hierarchical pathways in the CNS. Then metabotropic receptors. In neurons, activation of metabotropic neurotransmitter receptor often leads to the modulation of voltage-gated channels. So here there is a possibility of involvement of voltage-gated channels. And the G protein coupled receptors, so they have alpha, beta, gamma subunit. Often the beta gamma subunit, this goes and combinedly directly interacts with the voltage-gated channels. This point we have discussed in a receptor topic. So this combines with voltage gated channels, that is like calcium channels or potassium channels. When G proteins interact with calcium channels, they inhibit channel function. Presynaptic metabotropic receptors are activated, and then inhibition of neurotransmitter release. So we have discussed G protein receptors, here calcium channels and potassium channels. So when calcium channels interaction happens with G proteins, presynaptic metabotropic receptors will get activated, and there is final effect will be inhibition of neurotransmitter release. But when these receptors are post-synaptic, they activate potassium channels. So because of which potassium means negative effect. We have discussed this point earlier. So there will be slow post-synaptic inhibition, presynaptic autoinhibition, and postsynaptic inhibition. That's it. And metabotropic receptors can also modulate voltage-gated channels less directly by the generation of diffuse second messengers. Example is beta-adrenoceptor, which generates cyclic AMP via the activation of adenylyl cyclase. So this point must have been covered in the autonomic nervous system, beta-adrenoceptor receptor-mediated activation. Okay. In contrast to the brief effect of inotropic receptors, that effect of metabotropic receptor activation can last tens of seconds to minutes. So this is a little bit more time it will take. So these receptors predominant in the diffuse neuronal systems in the CNS. Then coming to the synaptic transmission, this also you must be aware of, you must have studied in physiology, just a recap of it. An action potential propagating down the axon of the presynaptic neuron enters the synaptic terminal and activates voltage-sensitive calcium channels in the membrane of the terminal. As calcium flows into the terminal, the increase in intra-terminal calcium concentration promotes the fusion of synaptic vesicles of the presynaptic membrane, and then because of which fusion, the neurotransmitter that is present in the vesicles is released in the synaptic cleft and diffuses to the receptors, that is postsynaptic receptors. So the neurotransmitter binds to the postsynaptic receptors, opens the channels either directly or indirectly, causing a brief change in membrane conductance, that is permeability to ions, whatever the ions that are involved of the postsynaptic cell. So the time delay from the arrival of the presynaptic action potential to the onset of the postsynaptic response is approximately 0.5 milliseconds. This is a very, very important point for viva voce. Most of this delay is consumed by the release process, that is particularly the time required for calcium channels to open. Then presynaptic inhibitory receptors are present on almost all presynaptic terminals in the brain, even though axonic synapses appear to be restricted to the spinal cord. So there is no doubt everywhere they are present. In the brain, transmitter can spill out of the synapse and activate presynaptic receptors. So this is a synaptic cleft. So when this transmitter is getting released out of the synaptic vesicles, it is like a gush and then just like it is spilling over the presynaptic receptors and they may get activated either on the same synapse, outer receptors, or even on neighboring synapses also. It's a very, very important point. So this transmitter can spill on the same neuron presynaptic receptors or even heteroreceptors also and produce cascade of events. So presynaptic receptors or autoreceptors also play an important role in the modulation of neurotransmitter release from the presynaptic terminals. We have discussed this point. Presynaptic release of the neurotransmitter CNS is regulated either by homotrophic or by heterotrophic receptor interaction in a manner similar to that in peripheral. Same happens between the peripheral nervous system and central nervous system. Activation of the presynaptic receptors in the CNS can result either in inhibition, which is most commonly seen in muscarinic receptors, alpha-2 receptors, and dopamine receptors, or in enhancement of the respective neurotransmitter release that is most commonly seen in nicotinic receptors and beta-2 receptors. That means presynaptic autoreceptors means it doesn't mean that always there is inhibitory action. There is a stimulatory action also, which is most commonly seen with nicotinic and beta-2 receptors. Then coming to the central neurotransmitters proper. So you must have understood properly the basics of the central nervous system and then the ion channels and neurotransmitters, the just basics we have covered, and then synaptic transmission. Now we will go into the central neurotransmitters proper. This is the crux of this topic. In CNS, there are many neurotransmitters unlike ANS. ANS very few we have. So we have neurotransmitters like here biogenic amines, that is acetylcholine, noradrenaline, dopamine, 5-HT or serotonin, histamine, etc. And amino acids like glycine, GABA, aminobutyric acid, and glutamic acid. And other neurotransmitters like peptides are also seen. Example, substance P, somatostatin, CCK, VIP, NPY, tachykines, vasopressin, and arachidonic acid metabolites. So many peptides are still not established as true neurotransmitter based on the criteria for a particular chemical to be classified under neurotransmitter. Based on the effect, the neurotransmitter may be either excitatory such as glutamate and aspartate or inhibitory such as GABA and glycine. And other neurotransmitters may act as inhibitory or excitatory or even mixture of both the things depending on the area of the brain where they are present. So in the central nervous system, we have excitatory transmitters, inhibitory transmitters. Excitatory means glutamate and aspartate. Inhibitory means glycine and GABA. So don't get confused. So please try to pay attention. Acetylcholine. We've been going through one neurotransmitter now. Acetylcholine was the first compound to be identified pharmacologically as a transmitter in the CNS. So we have here both the muscarinic receptors and nicotinic neuronal receptors, subtypes that are present in the CNS. So you must have studied about the NN and NN receptors. So in the central nervous system, we have only NN receptors. And then acetylcholine is thought to modulate arousal, respiration, motor activity, vertigo, and memory. Centrally acting anti-muscarinic drugs are useful in the management of Parkinson's disease or in the prevention of motion sickness. You just try to keep this point in mind. So whenever we discuss about the Parkinson's disease, then you'll get back to principle that is used there regarding the anti-muscarinic drugs. Anticholinergics such as Tacrane, Donepezil, and Rivastigmine are used to improve cognitive effects related to Alzheimer's disease. So Parkinson's disease, anti-muscarinic drugs are used. Alzheimer's disease, anticholinergic drugs are used. Then amines proper. So we have monoamines and diamines. Monoamines examples are catecholamines like dopamine and norepinephrine, and also 5-hydroxytryptamine. Diamines, histamine. Although these compounds are present in very small amounts in the central nervous system, they can be localized using extremely sensitive histochemical methods. These pathways are the site of action of many drugs. Example, CNS stimulants like cocaine and amphetamine appear to act primarily at catecholamine synapses. So these come under the category of amines. Cocaine blocks the reuptake of dopamine and noradrenaline, and amphetamine causes presynaptic terminals to release these transmitters. Just the principles I'm just discussing. So don't become panicked that so many names, but how should we remember like that? Then coming to the dopamine, it is the most important of the biogenic neurotransmitters in the CNS, primarily an inhibitory neurotransmitter like that of the glycine and GABA. Its deficiency causes extrapyramidal disturbances, and all receptors are metabotropic. So we have 5 dopaminergic receptors, D1 to D5. So they fall into 2 categories, that is D1, which includes D1 and D5, and D2 group that includes D2, D3, D4. So D1 group produces excitatory action, and D2 group produces inhibitory action. D1 and D5, so that belongs to D1. They stimulate the release of cyclic AMP by activation of adenylyl cyclase. So cascade of events follow. So we're giving rise to excitatory response. So these receptors are coupled to GS protein, that is metabotropic receptors. So excitatory action will be the final result. D1 receptor is located in the region of putamen nucleus accumbens and in olfactory tubercle, that is nigrostriatal pathway. Its inhibition causes extrapyramidal disorders. Okay. Then D5 receptor is found in hypothalamus and hippocampus. Exact role is not ignored. D2, D3, D4, that is which belong to D2 group. They inhibit cyclic AMP. This is inhibitory pathway. Block calcium channels and then open potassium channels. Hyperpolarization also may happen. They are coupled to GI proteins, unlike that of the D1 group, which are coupled to GS proteins. D2 receptor is distributed in striatum, substantia nigra, and pituitary, involved in the control of behavior, voluntary movements, prolactin release, and in other endocrine consequences. And D3 receptors in midbrain, nucleus accumbens, and hypothalamus. D4 in frontal cortex, medulla, and midbrain, that is mesocortical pathway. So all these dopamine receptors will be again discussed when we deal with Parkinson's disease. Some of the atypical neuroleptics possess D3 and D4 antagonistic properties, but their exact role in schizophrenia cannot be fully established unless specific or predominantly D3 or D4 receptor antagonists are made available for evaluation as neuroleptics. So atypical neuroleptics are there which have D3 and D4 antagonistic properties. So they may be used in schizophrenia, but the exact role is not clearly discussed, like that of the D3 or D4 receptor antagonists. A byproduct of illicit opioid manufacture known as MPTP has been shown to cause selective destruction of nigrostriatal dopaminergic neurons and produce Parkinson's-like syndrome in opioid addicts. So this MPTP-induced toxicity, you may get a short note or even 2 marks question, and it is very, very important question for postgraduates. MPTP-induced cytotoxicity in the central nervous system. Norepinephrine, it constitutes about 30% of total CNS catecholamines. It is a neurotransmitter of brainstem neurons within locus coeruleus with projections to cortex, cerebellum, and spinal cord. And this is the neurotransmitter of postganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system. So when we ask in final viva, what is the main neurotransmitter in the sympathetic nervous system? Many of the people, many students, they tell by default adrenaline. It is not adrenaline, it is noradrenaline. Very, very important for viva. In CNS, noradrenaline is, or norepinephrine, whatever it may be, is thought to modulate affective disorders, that is like depression, and then learning, memory, arousal, and pain perception. And it can hyperpolarize neurons by increasing potassium conductance. This effect is mediated by alpha-2 receptors. So this you must have studied in autonomic nervous system already. In many, so that's why I'm not going to again deal with it. In many regions of the CNS, norepinephrine enhances excitatory inputs both by direct and indirect mechanisms. So indirect mechanism is by disinhibition, and that is inhibitory locus circuit neurons are inhibited. Inhibition is inhibited. Direct mechanism involves blockade of potassium channels that slows neuronal discharge. Facilitation of excitatory synaptic transmission is in accordance with many of the behavioral processes thought to involve noradrenergic pathways like attention and arousal. So if this excitatory synaptic transmission is good, the person's attention capacity is very good. In contrast to dopamine and noradrenaline, concentration of epinephrine in CNS is quite low, that is just 5 to 12%. It is localized primarily in cell bodies of reticular formation, but the precise role is still not clear. Then 5-hydroxytryptamine. Serotonergic neurons are found primarily near the midline raphe nuclei of the brainstem and project to the cortex, cerebellum, and spinal cord. So 90% of 5-HT is present in enterochromaffin cells in GIT, mainly GIT you should remember. But 10% is shared with platelets and brain. Even though the amount of 5-HT that is present in the brain is very minimal, that is just 10%, this 5-HT acts as a potential neurotransmitter in the mediation of a wide variety of brain functions. And apart from this GIT, platelets, brain, it is also synthesized by pineal gland. Here, it serves as a precursor for the synthesis of melatonin by an action with the hypothalamus. Then functions of 5-HT. It modulates sensory pathways like nociception and homeostasis. And they also play an important role in schizophrenia, depression, blood pressure regulation, and eating disorders, and are the targets of many drugs for treating these disorders. And regulation of other functions like perception, mood, anxiety, pain, sleep, appetite, temperature, neuroendocrine control, and depression. And they act on more than a dozen receptor subtypes. So what type of receptors these are? 5-HT receptors. Except 5-HT3 receptor, which is an inotropic receptor, all the other 11 types of subtypes of receptors are GPCR. Inotropic 5-HT3 receptor exerts a rapid excitatory action at a very limited number of sites in the CNS. This is just introduction topic, so I'm just giving a like overview of the central nervous system. In most areas of the CNS, 5-HT has a strong inhibitory action. This action is mediated by 5-HT1A receptors and is associated with membrane hyperpolarization caused by potassium conductance. 5-HT1A receptors and GABA-B receptors activate the same population of potassium channels. This is like a correlation of these two receptor-mediated action. So 5-HT1A receptors is inhibitory action. Some cell types are slowly excited by 5-HT owing to its blockade of potassium channels via 5-HT2 or 4 receptors. So we can see both excitatory and inhibitory actions on the same neuron. So 5-HT1A receptor agonists like buspirone, it is used to treat anxiety disorders. 1D receptor agonist, sumatriptan, used to treat migraine and cluster headaches. 2A or 2C antagonist, clozapine, used to treat schizophrenia. And reuptake inhibitors, SSRI, that is fluoxetine, used to treat depression and obsessive compulsive disorders. Then coming to the histamine. In the CNS, histamine is exclusively made by neurons in the tuberomammillary nucleus in the posterior hypothalamus. So neurons may project widely throughout the brain and spinal cord where they are involved in the process of arousal, attention, feeding behavior, and memory. So we have 4 types of histamine receptors, H1 to 4, all are metabotropic receptors. Centrally acting antihistamines, the drugs which block these histamine receptors are generally used for their sedative properties. And antagonism of H1 receptors is a common side effect of many drugs, including some tricyclic antidepressants and antipsychotics. So these drugs, tricyclic antidepressants and antipsychotics, they also have the same kind of side effect. H1 receptor antagonistic action. Histaminergic neurons and postsynaptic central H1 receptors play a major role in arousal. So that's why whenever we block H1 receptors, the patient will be complaining of sedation. Blockade of these receptors is thought to occur for sedation experienced after taking antihistamines like chlorpheniramine and diphenhydramine. Other possible roles of histamine are regulation of food and water intake, body temperature, hormone release, and sleep. Then coming to the actual subject, that is amino acid neurotransmitters. So this is very, very important, very, very complex subject matter. So please pay attention. If you can't understand, just go back and then revise multiple times. If you still have any doubt, you can ask me at any time. So there are two types of amino acid transmitters: acidic, that is glutamate; neutral, that is glycine and GABA. These compounds are present in high concentration in the CNS and are extremely potent modifiers of neuronal excitability. So normally there is a balance between excitatory inputs and inhibitory inputs. Excitatory means glutamate, inhibitory means GABA and glycine as well. And here glutamate and aspartate as well. Determining the prevailing level of neuronal activity in limbic system and reticular activating system in the brain. So if excitatory system is predominant, so there will be arousal. So this like inhibitory system is predominant, then depression or sleepiness, all these kinds of negative cascade of events or behavioral phenomena will result. If the balance swings in favor of GABA, that is depression, that is inhibitory activity is predominant, anxiety and nervousness are decreased, while sedation, amnesia, muscle relaxation, ataxia, all this will appear. In contrast, a reduction in GABAergic activity elicits, that is like predominance of excitatory response. That is arousal and precipitation of anxiety, insomnia, and restlessness can be seen in that particular person. Glutamate and aspartate are the main excitatory amino acids in the CNS capable of depolarizing the neurons. GABA is the main inhibitory transmitter in the brain. Glycine is also an inhibitory transmitter, but in the spinal cord and the brainstem. Both the GABA and glycine are capable of hyperpolarizing the neurons. So glutamate and aspartate, excitatory amino acids, so they act through depolarization. And GABA and glycine are inhibitory amino acids. They act through hyperpolarization of the neurons. So this is the overview of the slides till now which we have discussed. Then coming to the one particular neurotransmitter, GABA, glycine, glutamate, etc. The cell membrane of most vertebrate CNS neurons and astrocytes express GABA receptors, which decrease neuronal excitability through several mechanisms. Drugs that modulate GABA receptors affect arousal, attention, memory formation, anxiety, sleep, and muscle tone. Modulation of GABA signaling is also an important mechanism for the treatment of focal or wide spread neuronal hyperactivity in epilepsy. So that has to be controlled through GABA mediated mechanisms. Inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters regulate every behavioral process like consciousness, sleep, learning, memory, and all sensations. And they're also implicated in pathological processes such as epilepsy and also neurotoxicity associated with stroke. So it's very, very important which neurotransmitter, which type of neurotransmitter, that is like either inhibitory or exhibitory, has to be elevated or decreased depending on the pathological situation of the patient. GABA is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in mammalian CNS, present uniformly in brain, but only little amount in periphery. So it is predominant in brain. It is synthesized from glutamate. I'll show the diagram also. We'll just go through the slide description first. So this is primarily synthesized from glutamate by the enzyme L-glutamic acid levodecarboxylase. That is GAD in GABAergic nerve terminals. This is the synthesis. From glutamate, GABA is synthesized with GAD. So this GAD requires vitamin B6 as a cofactor. So GABA is synthesized. This GABA is packed into presynaptic vesicles by vesicular transporter, that is VGAD. So here you can see glutamate. From glutamate is synthesized with the help of glutamate synthase. And then from here, with the help of glutamate decarboxylase, decarboxylation reaction happens and GABA is synthesized. So vitamin B6 acts as a cofactor in this reaction. Then this GABA is synthesized. How it is going to get metabolized? It is subsequently metabolized by GABA transaminase, that is GABA T, to succinic semi-aldehyde first, then oxidized to succinic acid. So transaminase reaction giving rise to succinic semi-aldehyde, then oxidation reaction giving rise to succinic acid by succinic semi-aldehyde dehydrogenase. So this final metabolite that is formed with succinic acid, it enters the Krebs cycle to become alpha ketoglutarate. And this alpha ketoglutarate, with the help of GABA T, regenerates glutamate from this alpha ketoglutarate. From this again, glutamate is synthesized. Let us see the reaction here. So GABA transaminase. So here what we have seen, alpha, succinic semi-aldehyde is formed with the help of GABA transaminase. So here we have discussed this. Yeah, with the help of succinic semi-aldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme, this succinic semi-aldehyde is again getting converted into succinic acid, which will get finally converted into alpha ketoglutarate, which enters into the Krebs cycle. And this molecule, again with the help of GABA transferase, will get transformed into, it will release GABA. So what happens to this GABA? We'll see in this subsequent slides. So in response to an action potential on the presynaptic elevation of intracellular calcium, GABA is released into the synaptic cleft by fusion of GABA containing vesicles with the presynaptic membrane. Okay, GABA is released, metabolized. Then termination of GABA action at the synapse depends on the removal of GABA from the extracellular space. So it has to be removed from that synaptic cleft. So what happens? The GABA is released and present at the synaptic cleft. So here, that particular GABA molecules will be taken up by the neurons and glia through GABA transporters, that is like GATs 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the cell. So you can see that here, glutamine converted into glutamate, then GABA. This is synthesis. Then here, this vesicular storage will happen with the help of the VAT proteins, that is the neurotransmitter proteins. Then this is going to like neurotransmitter GABA is going to get released with the help of exocytosis with the involvement of calcium and fusion of this synaptic membrane with the vesicles. Then GABA is released into synaptic cleft. Then here, these GABA molecules will be reuptaken by with the help of GABA transporter into the glia and other neurons. And here this GABA, it will get again converted into glutamate. And then with the help of glutamine synthetase, glutamine will be formed. And this glutamine, with the help of the transporter, it will reach back again into the presynaptic terminal. And then again, the same cascade of events happen. Okay. So how it is going to produce its actions? Two types of receptors, inotropic A receptors, metabotropic B receptors. Inhibitory postsynaptic potentials in many areas of the brain have a fast and slow component. Okay. The fast component is mediated by A receptor, slow component by B receptor. So obviously, inotropic fast response, metabotropic slow response. The difference in kinetics stems from the differences in coupling of the receptors to ion channels. A receptors are the most prevalent of these two receptor subtypes. They are located postsynaptically and are directly linked with chloride ion channel because it is like inhibitory neurotransmitter. Okay. Chloride ion channel opening, that is inotropic receptor. A means inotropic, that's what we discussed, which causes hyperpolarization and reduction in membrane excitability because GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA A, inotropic receptor, chloride inflow, and then hyperpolarization, reduction in membrane excitability. So here the drugs like musimal is an agonist at GABA A receptor, while convergent picosilin is an antagonist and interferes with GABA binding to GABA A receptors. Most GABA receptors are composed of alpha, beta, and gamma subunits. Receptors composed of alpha and beta subunits produce functional GABA receptors that respond to barbiturates, but not to benzodiazepines. Okay, this we'll see in the subsequent diagrams. Co-assembly with gamma subunits is necessary for assembly of benzodiazepine receptors. So only alpha and beta receptors, if they are present, they are going to act through GABA A receptors mediated action for barbiturates. If you want to produce benzodiazepine receptor mediated action, the gamma subunit also has to get involved along with alpha beta subunits. Then GABA A receptor has several different accessory binding sites. It's a very complicated structure this molecule has, even though it is simple inotropic receptor. That is, number one is neurotransmitter GABA binding site. That is one. Because it is a GABA receptor, GABA has to get bind to that receptor. The number two, modulatory sites to bind benzodiazepines. Their antagonists such as flumazenil and inverse agonists such as carbolines. Modulatory sites here, agonist is benzodiazepine, antagonist is flumazenil, and then inverse agonist is carbolines. So all this like act as like it's like a modulatory site. So anything can combine, and then it modulates the cascade of events depending on the necessity. Then number three, modulatory as well as blocking site at the chloride ion channel for barbiturates and picrotoxin. Then GABA A receptor has pentameric structure. We'll see the structure now. Assembled from 5 subunits selected from 7 polypeptide classes. Major isoform of the A receptor in the brain consists of 5 subunits, that is 2 alpha 1, 2 beta 2, and 1 gamma 2 subunit. Binding of GABA with its site located between alpha 1 and beta 2. We have 2 alpha 1, 2 beta 2. So between 1 alpha 1 and 1 beta 2 subunits, if GABA goes and combines with it, it triggers chloride channel opening with resultant membrane hyperpolarization. Whereas for benzodiazepines, the receptor lies between alpha 1 and gamma 2. So we have just now discussed in the earlier slide, like if benzodiazepines need to get activated, gamma subunit involvement also must be there, not just simply alpha and beta. So remember that point. So don't get confused. For benzodiazepines to give an action, the receptor is present between alpha 1 and gamma 2. There, for barbiturates, which act through GABA receptor, that is between alpha 1 and beta 2. There beta 2, here gamma 2. This facilitates GABA binding to its receptor sites and increases the frequency of chloride channel opening. So GABA means entire chloride. Okay. Benzodiazepine binding site is otherwise known as benzodiazepine receptor. Okay. Co-expression of individual gamma subunit variants, that is like 1, 2, 3 with alpha and beta subunits, is in varying modulatory sites for antagonists and inverse agonist site benzodiazepine receptor. Anyway, gamma subunit involvement is for benzodiazepine action or benzodiazepine site. So whatever may be the subunit variant 1 or 2 or 3, when it combines with alpha and beta subunits, it will act like modulator site for antagonists and inverse agonists at benzodiazepine receptor. So alpha 1 subunits in GABA A receptors mediate sedation, amnesia, and anti-seizure effects of benzodiazepines, whereas alpha 2 subunits mediate anti-anxiety and muscle relaxant properties. And recently identified, there is one more alpha 5 subunit that is involved in memory impairment caused by benzodiazepines. People generally say that when patient uses benzodiazepines for a long period of time, there is no loss of memory, but there is loss of memory. Patients can express better than even the doctors. GABA receptors. The adjacent site between alpha and beta subunit of GABA receptors are the functional receptors that respond to barbiturates but not to benzodiazepines. We have discussed this point. In therapeutic doses, barbiturates act on these channel modulatory sites of GABA receptors and potentiate GABA mediated inhibitory effects by increasing the duration of chloride channel opening. So same is the case at higher concentration. So this is therapeutic concentration. Okay. If you increase the higher concentration of the drug molecule, Then barbiturates directly increase chloride ion conductance, that is GABA mimetic action, even in the absence of GABA. Even if the neurotransmitter is not available, they directly act through increasing chloride ion channel conductance. So convergence like picrotoxin block this chloride ion channel. Convergence means excited reaction must be present. So what can you see? So retrograde analysis. So GABA means inhibitory, convergence means excitatory. So inhibitory has to be inhibited. So GABA has to be inhibited. So blockade of the chloride ion channels. So that happens with picrotoxin molecule, which acts like a convergence. Some neurosteroid anticonvulsants like ganaxolone act on a selective and separative modulator site at the GABA A receptor complex, increasing chloride ion conductance. GABA B receptors, they are coupled to G proteins that depend on their cellular location, either inhibit calcium channels or activate potassium channels. These are like nothing but metabotropic receptors. So calcium and potassium channels are involved. So calcium inhibition or potassium activation, because the net effect that we have to get through GABA is inhibitory action. These receptors cause pre and post synaptic inhibition, that is hyperpolarization, by inhibiting calcium channel opening and increasing potassium conductance. GABA B component of the inhibitory postsynaptic potential is due to selective increase in potassium conductance. So hyperpolarization mechanism prevails. So this inhibitory postsynaptic potential is long lasting and very slow process, because it's a metabotropic response receptor. Because the coupling of receptor activation to potassium channel opening is indirect and delayed. Because metabotropic receptor is always indirect and delayed only. Peripheral acting skeletal muscle relaxant, that is baclofen, is a GABA B receptor agonist and is used to treat spastic disorders. It produces muscle relaxation. GABA B receptors are also present on the axon terminals of many excitatory and inhibitory synapses. In this case, GABA spills over onto the presynaptic GABA B receptors. Okay, inhibiting transmitter release by inhibiting calcium channels. Presynaptic calcium channel inhibition, postsynaptic potassium channel activation. GABA B metabotropic. Hope it is clear. In addition to their coupling to ion channels, GABA B receptors also inhibit adenylyl cyclase and decrease cyclic AMP generation. This is another pathway. Okay, so ion channels means calcium and what else is there? Potassium channels. And apart from that, cyclic AMP pathway. So that is like suppression, GI. So here you can see 2 alpha, 2 beta, and 1 gamma. So chloride ion channel. This is between alpha and beta, GABA binding site. Between alpha and gamma, benzodiazepine binding site. So this is main receptor channel, chloride ion channel. So benzodiazepine binding site, barbiturate binding site, GABA site, steroid site. This is like phosphorylation site. Okay. So here you can see 2 alpha, 2 beta, and 1 gamma. So GABA agonists like Musimal. So there is like exaggerated activity through beta subtype of receptor. Antagonist suppressed activity, that is bicosylin. That is also through beta subunit. And barbiturates, alcohols, anesthetics, all these act through beta subunit. So exaggerated activity of inhibitory action. Benzodiazepines agonists like gamma. So we have discussed benzodiazepine means gamma involvement must be there. So exaggerated inhibition, and then antagonists here through alpha, and inverse agonists, that is decreased. Antagonists, they don't produce any action. So decreased action with inverse agonists. And peptides also decreased action. Convergence and picrotoxins also act through both alpha and gamma. So decreased response. Hope it is clear. Okay, if you don't understand, revise it again, here to it, then you'll get the clarity. Then glycine receptors. So GABA we have discussed, inhibitory neurotransmitter. Another inhibitory neurotransmitter is glycine. This is enriched in medulla, spinal cord, lower brainstem, and retina. They are pentameric structures that are selectively permeable to chloride ion channels. Okay. There one is GABA A, GABA B, inotropic, metabotropic. Here it is directly getting involved into chloride ion channels. See here, this is very important point for both UGs and PGs. Strychnine, which is a potent spinal cord convulsant and has been used in some rat poison, selectively blocks glycine receptors. Okay, remember this point. We'll discuss about it later with some of correction to some other point. So strychnine blocks glycine receptors. That is the carry home message from this slide. Glycine receptor is structurally and functionally similar to GABA A receptors, so directly linked to chloride ion channels. Whereas GABA B, calcium and potassium channels, and GI also, metabotropic pathway. Then the native glycine receptor, that is strychnine sensitive glycine receptor. That's what we discussed. Strychnine blocks glycine receptors. That means there is sensitivity between strychnine and glycine. Okay. So the native glycine receptor, which is strychnine sensitive, is a pentameric structure, and both the glycine and strychnine binding sites appear to be located on the same alpha subunit. So on the same receptor, you will be seeing glycine binding site, strychnine binding site, and both of them combine and then produce their actions. Strychnine blocks the glycine. And these binding sites are present on the same alpha subunit. Okay. The convulsant drug strychnine is a competitive antagonist at glycine receptor. We discussed that point. While tetanus toxin acts mainly by preventing the glycine release, causing excessive reflex hyperexcitability and violent muscle spasm. So tetanus toxins, this prevents glycine release. So glycine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So that is inhibited. Release is inhibited. So excitatory response will be the net effect, causing excessive reflex hyperexcitability, violent muscle spasm, that is like lockjaw, which is seen in patients suffering from tetanus toxemia. Both GABA and glycine are inhibitory neurotransmitters, which are typically released from local interneurons. Interneurons that release glycine are restricted to the spinal cord and brainstem, whereas interneurons releasing GABA are present throughout the CNS, including spinal cord. Generally, glycine for spinal cord and brainstem, and GABA for CNS, and sometimes spinal cord also. But some interneurons in the spinal cord can release both GABA and glycine as well. Okay. Activation of NMDA receptors requires low concentration of glycine along with glutamate. So this point you will get clarity when we discuss about NMDA receptors. Next topic is that one only. Next subtopic. So activation of NMDA receptors, that is like glutamate receptors or NMDA receptors, that is excitatory neurotransmitter receptors. That requires low concentration of glycine along with glutamate. So glutamate has to be present and low concentration of glycine also has to be present. So the binding sites of both glutamate and glycine are different, but both have to be occupied for the receptor channel to open. NMDA receptor channel, if it has to be open, so both glutamate and glycine has to bind with the receptor sites. Glycine is primarily recognized as inhibitory neurotransmitter, whereas NMDA receptor echo agonist as to glutamate, that is, it facilitates excitation. Okay, so NMDA means glutamate receptor, that is excitatory response. Glycine means inhibitory response. Till this point, it is clear to you. This effect of glycine is strychnine insensitive, suggesting a mechanism involving allosteric regulation of the NMDA receptor complex through a separate glycine binding site on this receptor. Allosteric means it is not on the same site. It is a different site. NMDA receptor is having glycine and glutamate attachments, that is like binding sites. So because of separate binding site, that is separate glycine binding site on the same receptor, allosteric regulation happens, and net effect is the glycine is strychnine insensitive here. So regarding the NMDA receptors, there is no role of strychnine here. And when we go back to the glycine, strychnine will also combine with strychnine binding site when glycine is producing its own response. Okay, hope it is clear. Main effect of glycine is to prevent desensitization of NMDA receptor during prolonged exposure to agonist. So agonist is administered to a patient. So NMDA receptor stimulation happened. So it is going for a long period of time because we are giving the drug for a long period of time. So over a long period of time, there is a possibility of desensitization of that particular receptor that we have discussed in the basics of receptors class. So that will be prevented by glycine. Okay, that is the main role of glycine here with NMDA receptors. So glycine probably accelerates the recovery of the receptor from its desensitized state rather than blocking the onset of desensitization. Okay. Glutamate and aspartate. We'll discuss about it now. So we have discussed GABA and glycine. Now comes glutamate and aspartate. They are the two excitatory neurotransmitters widely concentrated in cortex, basal ganglia, and sensory pathways. Besides acting as neurotransmitters, they also play an important role in the intermediary metabolism in neural tissue, that is detoxification of ammonia in brain, building blocks in the synthesis of peptides and proteins, and as precursor for inhibitory GABA. Glutamate released from the presynaptic terminals binds to glutamate receptor subtypes. Their activation increases the conductance of sodium and calcium into the cells, leading to depolarization. Glutamate is excitatory transmitter. Obviously, positive response will be getting. Sodium and calcium, normal only. So if you understand the basic receptors class in the general pharmacology, all these things you can easily write. Leading to depolarization, that is inotropic glutamate receptors, or it stimulates phosphatidyl inositol turnover, that is metabotropic glutamate receptors. So anyway, inotropic or metabotropic positive response, that is excitation. And if it is inotropic, sodium and calcium entry, leading to depolarization. Otherwise, phosphatidyl inositol turnover cascade. Okay. So we have two receptors here, glutamate receptors. One is NMDA receptors, that is N-methyl D-aspartate receptors. And another one is non-NMDA receptors. Non-NMDA receptors and NMDA receptors. In fact, all the receptors are from this introduction topic are very, very important, especially NMDA receptors and non-NMDA receptors. They may get, you may be asked in your final exam as a short notes. And it is very important for postgraduate students also. Non-NMDA receptors mediate the fast excitatory neurotransmission associated with excitatory postsynaptic potentials at glutamatergic response synapses. Whereas the activation of NMDA receptors is associated with long-term potentiation, a prolonged increase in the size of postsynaptic response to a presynaptic stimulus. We have discussed this point in the introduction. This is long-term potentiation or synaptic plasticity. All these things are involved for the regulation of learning and memory process. Most commonly that is used clinically. Excitatory amino acids are involved in brain processes such as learning, memory, and thinking, and their concentration is decreased in patients with Huntington's chorea and Alzheimer's disease. So here we go with the drugs because they have that particular property of the NMDA receptor mediated long-term potentiation. We can use those molecules in Huntington's chorea and Alzheimer's disease where there is a problem with learning, memory, etc. Very high concentrations of glutamate can cause neuronal cell death, that is excitotoxicity. Again, very important for postgraduate students. Synthesis, storage, and release of glutamate. In brain, glutamine is synthesized in the nerve terminals from two sources, that is from glucose via the Krebs cycle and transamination of oxyglutarate, and from glutamine that is synthesized in the glial cells. So from glutamate is synthesized. The high concentration of glutamate in synaptic vesicles is achieved by the vesicular glutamate transporter, same like that which we discussed earlier. So V-glut transporter. Then this is stored in the synaptic vesicles and released by calcium-dependent exocytosis. As usual, the same pathway. After its release and action, glutamate is recaptured from the synaptic cleft by neuronal type glutamate transporters into the neuron and glial type transporters into the glial cells. Glial glutamate is then converted to glutamine by the enzyme glutamine synthetase. We'll discuss, we'll see all these cascade of events in a particular diagram. Next slide. Uh, Glial glutamate is then converted to glutamine by the enzyme glutamine synthetase. And glutamine subsequently enters the nearby neuron to replenish the glutamate after hydrolysis by mitochondrial glutaminase. So glutamine serves as a pool of inactive transmitter within the glial cells. So it does not have any action. This glutamine does not have any action in glial cells. Just reuptake mechanism happens, and then it just again throws back this glial cells again throw back the glutamine to the normal neuronal membrane. Okay, so it acts like in the glial cells, it acts just like a ball boy in the tennis court who just returns the ball back to the player for fresh service. So here you can see from glutamine, glutamate is synthesized. Then it is stored in the vesicles with the help of vesicle containing neurotransmitter. Vesicular transporter is there. Then with the help of calcium-induced exocytosis, neurotransmitter glutamate is released. It is taken up by the glial cells. And this glutamate is again getting converted into glutamine with the help of glutamine synthetase. And this is thrown back. It is like a ball boy. Thrown back to the presynaptic terminal where it can be again used for the cascade of events. Very simple. Okay. So we have two receptors, types of receptors, inotropic receptors and metabotropic glutamate receptors. So ultimately we have 5 types. So they are divided into 2 types. This is very complex. So please pay attention to it. 5 types. So they are classified. These 5 types are classified into inotropic receptors and metabotropic receptors. Inotropic means NMDA receptors linked to calcium channels, AMPA receptors linked to sodium channels, kainate receptors linked to sodium channels. So only NMDA calcium channels. B and C, that is AMPA and kainate, are linked to sodium channels. They are known as non-NMDA receptors, but they come under the category of inotropic receptors. Then comes metabotropic receptors, that is AP4 and ACP. Just try to remember the abbreviation. So AP4 is an inhibitory autoreceptors and APCD is like it modulates the calcium release. You can see NMDA, AMPA, kainate. NMDA receptors, non-NMDA receptors are AMPA and kainate. So this all 3 belong to inotropic receptors producing fast excitatory response. Metabotropic receptors again divided into 1, 2, 3 groups: slow excitatory, slow inhibitory, because it is metabotropic, G protein coupled, and then messenger involvement, second messenger involvement. So it takes a little bit more time. So it can be in excitatory or inhibitory. All these are excitatory. Here group 1 is excitatory and 2 and 3 are inhibitory. So these NMDA receptors, very, very important short note both for UGs and PGs. PGs anyway, there is no short note, so it's very, very important. NMDA receptors, drugs acting through NMDA receptors for postgraduate students. They are involved in both neurophysiological and pathological processes, that is memory acquisition, development of synaptic plasticity, epilepsy, and neuronal excitotoxicity due to cerebral ischemia. Okay, so whenever there is pathology like epilepsy, cerebral ischemia, that is MI, there is the involvement of NMDA receptors. NMDA receptor is a pentamer composed of 2 subunits, that is NR1 and NR2. It's a ligand-gated ion channel receptor having high permeability to calcium, but some sodium involvement, sodium flow is also there. Binding sites are modulatory sites. We have seen for glutamate. So you see here the same is the case here. Glutamate or NMDA binding site promoting the opening of calcium or sodium channels, and then modulatory site that binds glycine. This site should not be confused with glycine binding site of glycine inhibitory receptors, which is strychnine sensitive. There, strychnine also combined with the same receptor at some other binding site for glycine receptor. But for here, NMDA receptors, there is no role of strychnine at all. It is not strychnine sensitive. Glutamate is virtually ineffective unless the modulatory site that binds glycine is also occupied. So this point we have studied in earlier slides. Both NMDA receptor has to be occupied and glycine receptor binding site also has to be occupied. So this modulatory site is not blocked by strychnine. So it is strychnine insensitive. So kynurenic acid that occurs exclusively in glial cells is an endogenous antagonist to this site. It's not a problem even if you don't remember these drugs in the introduction class. Okay, don't be panicked. A polyamide that is spermine and spermidine regulatory site, which also facilitates NMDA receptor channel opening. An investigational drug elliprodil blocks their action. Polyamine regulatory site. And then a site within the channel that binds phencyclidine and related non-competitive antagonist, that is ketamine, which acts most effectively when the receptor channel is activated, that is open channel block. So open channel, it is active state. So then this molecule is going to block that channel. So we have binding sites or modulatory sites, that is like NMDA binding site or glutamate binding site, and glycine binding site, polyamine binding site, phencyclidine binding site. Then comes magnesium binding site and zinc binding site. So many. It's very complicated receptor, glutamate and NMDA receptors. At resting membrane potentials, NMDA channel is blocked by magnesium, but this block is overcome if the cell is depolarized. This point we are going to discuss in detail later. Okay, resting membrane potential, NMDA channel, so it is blocked by magnesium. As soon as the cell gets depolarized, this block will be overcome because the magnesium will be thrown out. Then voltage dependent, again, zinc ion binding site near the mouth of the channel. That is, zinc produces voltage independent inhibitory action on NMDA receptor ion channel. So here you can see this is a glutamate recognition site, glycine site, zinc site, magnesium site, and polyamine site, PCP site. So potassium efflux and sodium and calcium influx, excitatory neurotransmitter. Okay, try to draw the diagrams whenever it is asked a question in your final exam. So activated NMDA receptor, so glutamate binding site, glycine binding site. So this is allosteric regulation. So calcium flow is there. Then NMDA receptors in the resting state. So magnesium is still attached. So it is blocked by, the channel is blocked by, when ion flow is blocked by magnesium ions. Glutamate and glycine binding sites to NR1 and 2 subunits of receptor. So glutamate and glycine binding opens the channel, but depolarization does not occur while the magnesium plug is still there, blocking the channel. So here, as soon as the depolarization starts, this magnesium will be thrown out, and then ion flow, that is like sodium and calcium ion flow, will happen, leading to the receptor activation. Then AMPA receptors. So we discussed NMDA receptors. And then we are going to discuss AMPA and kinetic receptors, which are otherwise known as non-NMDA receptors. Both AMPA and kinetic receptors mediate fast excitatory synaptic transmission associated with influx of sodium through sodium channels. AMPA receptors present on all neurons are heterotetramers assembled from 4 subunits, glutamate A1 to 4, and majority of receptors contain glutamine A2 subunit, which is permeable to sodium and potassium, but not calcium. But some AMPA receptors typically present on inhibitory interneurons lack the glutamine A2 subunit and are also permeable to calcium ions. So if glutamate A2 subunit is there, then there is no chance for calcium entry. If it is not there, then only calcium will enter. AMPA and quisqualate are the preferred agonists for AMPA receptor, while CNQX is a selective AMPA receptor antagonist. So this is the structure. So NMDA receptor, we have seen all the sites, glutamate, and then glycine, magnesium, zinc, PCP, and then ion flow, this you can see. And here this is just simple AMPA receptors, glutamate is there binding, and then just simple ion flow. Okay. Then two types of inotropic glutamate receptors. This is NMDA receptor, kainate, and AMPA receptors, non-NMDA receptors. So simple mechanism. Kainate receptors. Kainate receptors are pentamers consisting of glutamate receptor 5 to 7 subunits plus kainate 1 to 2 subunits. So similar to AMP receptors, these receptors are permeable to sodium and potassium, and in subunit combinations also to calcium. Domoic acid, a toxin produced by algae and concentrated in shellfish, is a potent agonist at kainate and AMP receptors. Consumption of contaminated shellfish has been implicated in illness in animals and humans, and NVQX is a selective antagonist of kainate receptor. This a clinical application, just a word I'm giving here. Then all NMDA receptors require the presence of the subunit glutamate N1. Channel also contains N2 subunits also. Unlike AMP and kainate receptors, all NMDA receptors are highly permeable to calcium as well as to sodium and potassium, because AMP and kainate only selective receptors are permeable to calcium, but NMDA permeable to all the ions. Then, what are the special features of NMDA receptors when compared to the non-NMDA receptors? In addition to glutamate binding, the channel also requires binding of glycine to a separate site in order for the channel to open. This is clear. While AMPA and kainate receptor activation results in channel opening at resting membrane potential, NMDA receptor action does not. That's what we have seen. Magnesium involvement is there. This is because at resting membrane potential, receptor pore is blocked by extracellular magnesium. So unless and until the nerve is strongly depolarized, which occurs with the intense activation of the synapse by the activation of neighboring synapses. So either that particular synapse has to be intensely stimulated or the neighboring synapses have to be stimulated, so that because of the intense stimulation, there is strong depolarization. So because of that strong depolarization, the magnesium is just expelled at one side, allowing the channel to open. Rise in intracellular calcium that accompanies NMDA receptor channel opening results in long-lasting enhancement in synaptic strength, that is referred to as long-term potentiation. We have discussed this. This enhancement is one of the major type of synaptic plasticity, lasts for many hours or even days, accepted as important cellular mechanism underlying learning and memory. This point is coming back and forth again and again, so please be careful to note it. Then metabotropic glutamate receptors. They act indirectly on ion channels via G proteins. 8 types are there, glutamate receptor 1 to 8. No agonist and antagonists are discussed so far, and they're divided into 1, 2, and 3 subgroups. So we will see. Group 1 receptors are typically located postsynaptically and activate phospholipase C, leading to inositol triphosphate cascade of events with calcium release involvement. And 2 and 3 are located on presynaptic nerve terminals, act as pre-inhibitory autoreceptors. So when they get activated, they cause inhibition of calcium channels, resulting in inhibition of neurotransmitter release. So metabotropic glutamate receptors, group 1, group 2, group 3. Group 1 is excitatory, group 2 and group 3 is they act through inhibitory autoreceptors. So you just remember that point, then you can write the mechanism in detail. These receptors are activated only when the concentration of glutamate rises to high levels during repetitive stimulation of the synapse. And they also cause the inhibition of adenyl cyclase and decrease cyclic AMP generation also sometimes. There is an important role of these receptors in both synaptic transmission and plasticity. Activation of metabotropic receptors is probably responsible for cocaine self-administration. That's what excitation and craving and the reinforcing properties of cocaine are absent in mice lacking metabotropic glutamate or 5 receptors. Then finally, peptides and miscellaneous neurotransmitters we are going to discuss. Peptides as neurotransmitters. About 24 endogenous peptides are known to have a probable role as central neurotransmitter. Examples opioid peptides like enkephalins, endorphins, neurotensin, substance P, somatostatins, cholecystokinin, vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, neuropeptide Y, and thyrotropin releasing hormone. Names of these neuropeptides are sometimes misleading because they were originally discovered as having other functions, but later on they were found to be having neurotransmitter property in the CNS. Like for example, gastrin and cholecystokinin. So previously they were known as gut hormones, and vasopressin was referred to as antidiuretic hormone previously. Now they later on found to be having neurotransmitter property also. Though classified as neurotransmitters, they differ from the smaller molecular weight neurotransmitters in many regards. Primary difference is in their synthesis. Unlike the small molecular weight transmitters, which are synthesized in neurons by cytoplasmic enzymes, peptides depend on the for their synthesis, they need transcription, translation, post-translation processes in a cell body. So it's a very complicated peptide neurotransmitter synthesis. The post-translation processing involves splitting up the precursor polypeptide into smaller peptides. Unlike the classical neurotransmitters, which are packaged in small synaptic vesicles, these are generally packed in large, dense core vesicles. And neuroactive peptides then leave the Golgi apparatus in secretory vesicles that also contain enzymes capable of converting peptides into final active form. Okay. These vesicles are then transported to the nerve terminal by the axonal transport mechanism and then released in response to action potential. Active form contained in the Golgi apparatus along with within the secretory vesicles along with the, after leaving the Golgi apparatus in the secretory, they contain enzymes. Okay. So then that will be transferred to the nerve terminal and then based on the action potential release, they will be liberated. They do not, but they'll be released into the synaptic cleft, but there is no presynaptic reuptake for these peptides. Some neuroactive peptides appear to coexist, co-transmission, coexist all these things, and be released as co-transmitters along with one or more neurotransmitters like acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, 5-HT. But the release of neuropeptides, even though there is co-transmitters involvement is there, at the time of release, but regulation of various transmitters in the co-transmission is independent. Okay. Release neuropeptides may act locally or may diffuse long distances and bind to distant receptors. Most neuropeptide receptors are metabotropic like monoamines and primarily serve modulatory roles in the nervous system. They've been implicated in a wide variety of CNS functions like reproduction, social behavior, appetite, arousal, pain, reward, learning, and memory. So targets of drug discovery efforts. Then comes our orexin. Orexin is very, very important for PGs. They're also called as hypocretins due to the near stimulation, simultaneous discovery of two independent laboratories. Like most neuropeptides, orexin is released from large dense core vesicles and bind to 2-GPCR. Orexin neurons also release glutamate and others excitatory. The system, like the monoamine system, projects widely throughout the CNS to influence physiology and behavior. The neurons exhibit firing patterns associated with wakefulness and project to and activate monoamine and acetylcholine neurons involved in sleep-wake cycles. Animals lacking orexin or its receptors have narcolepsy and disrupted sleep-wake patterns. So it is involved in the excitatory transmission and the wakefulness. So promoting wakefulness and energy homeostasis, feeding behaviors, autonomic function, and reward system are the main features. Then finally, the miscellaneous neurotransmitters. Just three are there. Endocannabinoids. That is, it is a very, 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 very important short note for you, for PGs as well. So Anandamide, that gives the pleasure, Ananda. An arachidonic acid derivative is an endogenous ligand for the central cannabinoid receptor, that is CB1. It is not stored in neuron as a classic neurotransmitter. It's not like storing and then getting released. No, all of a sudden, whenever there is need, it just gets released. Is rapidly synthesized by the neuron in response to depolarization as a consequence of calcium influx or activation of metabotropic receptors by acetylcholine or glutamate. So excitation. It is then released from postsynaptic neuron and travels backward retrograde signaling, that is across the synapse, activating CB1 receptor present on presynaptic neuron to suppress transmitter release. You can see here. So release in the synaptic cleft and then retrograde signaling going back and then combining with CB1 receptors present on the presynaptic terminal. They suppress the neurotransmitter release further. That is called as retrograde signaling. So CB1 is a G protein coupled receptor. There is an error here. There is only one. The G protein coupled receptor linked to the inhibition of adenylated cyclase. Subsequent transduction mechanism involves potassium channel activation and calcium channel inhibition to exert inhibitory effect on transmitter release. So it is like retrograde signal. They affect memory, cognition, and pain perception by this mechanism. Tetrahydrocannabinol, an active principle of cannabis, you must be aware of, boys especially, activates both CB4 receptors found in brain and CB2 receptors peripheral located. Distribution of CB1 receptor in brain correlates with pharmacological effects produced by tetrahydrocannabinol. Then comes nitric oxide, the second one. CNS contains a substantial amount of nitric oxide synthase within certain classes of neurons. This enzyme is activated by calcium calmodulin, and activation of NMDA receptors, which increases intracellular calcium, results in generation of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide synthetase, so calcium calmodulin complex stimulation by NMDA receptors and nitric oxide release. So physiological role is not yet clear. It's like controversial. Physiological role for nitric oxide has been clearly established for vascular smooth muscle, but not for synaptic transmission and synaptic plasticity, which is controversial. Nitric oxide diffuses freely across membranes and thus has been hypothesized to a retrograde messenger. Role of nitric oxide in neuronal signaling in the CNS is for long-term depression of synaptic transmission in cerebellum. Then comes purines, that is adenosine and ATP. Adenosine is not a conventional neurotransmitter, but a sort of local or hormone or homeostatic modulator. Serves as a safety device to protect neurons when threat of either seizure activity or cerebral ischemia happens within the body. So receptors A1, A2, A3, which are GPCR. A1, A3 is stimulatory, A2 is inhibitory to cyclic AMP formation. So A1 results in drowsiness, sedation, motor incoordination, cerebral vasodilatation, and anticonvulsant action. A2, hypotension, inhibition of platelet aggregation, coronary vasodilatation, stimulation of afferent neurons in heart leading to anginal pain. A3 gives rise to bronchoconstriction. So methyl xanthines antagonize these effects by acting as competitive antagonists at adenosine receptors 1, 2, and 3. And adenosine is also considered as an endogenous anti-seizure substance. It is like protective substance. It is present in cytosol in higher concentration and is usually released directly if neuronal threat is there, like stroke, seizures, or ischemia. High concentrations are found and released from catecholinergic synaptic vesicles by exocytosis. As co-transmitter, we have discussed in the earlier introductory slides, co-transmitter ATP. along with several other neurotransmitters. But soon it may get converted to adenosine extracellularly by nucleotidases. Receptors for purines, particularly adenosine, ATP, UTP, UDP, are found throughout the body, including the CNS. And adenosine in the CNS acts on metabotropic K1 receptors, and presynaptic K1 receptors inhibit calcium channels and inhibit release of both monoamine transmitters. ATP co-released with other neurotransmitters can bind to two classes of receptors, that is P2X and P2Y. P2X is inotropic, that is ligand-gated cation channel, and P2Y is metabotropic. Physiological role is elusive, but pharmacological studies suggest that these receptors are involved in memory, wakefulness, appetite, and play an important role in multiple neuropsychiatric disorders. So, thank you. So here ends the topic. So hope this topic is, I try to make it as simple as possible, but it is a very complex topic, introduction itself. So if you can understand the gist of this introductory topic, then you will be able to easily understand the central nervous system, all the drugs, all the chapters. Okay. Happy learning. Thank you. Thank you all.